Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's AISC student webinar, the decision date number 1 for the 2021 Student Steel Bridge Competition. Today is November 19th, and my name is Sadie Brown. I'm the special event planner at AISC, and we're so excited to have everyone together today for our first 2021 Ssbc decision date announcement. One of the goals of today's meeting is to provide you with a status update for all 2021 regional events and to walk you through the steps your next steps as we enter winter break and wait for decision date number 2 on January 15th. Before we get started, I just really want to commend all of you for being here today. Getting your team to this point in the competition is something to be really proud of given everything we're experiencing in the world right now. And we have 168 participating teams this year. 146 of those teams are participating in Ssbc in person or compete from campus. And our team is just so thrilled at those numbers and how many of you are willing to participate in this competition given everything else that you're having to deal with right now. I have also been in contact with a lot of schools over the past month, and I've just been blown away by the dedication, commitment, and innovation that the teams are showing this year. We really want you to know that all of your hard work isn't going unnoticed by us here at AISC. We see you hopping on Zoom calls in between classes, work, and your other commitments. Shout out to Kyle from Drexel, who is the senior Ssbc captain and chairman for their regional conference, and managed to call into a meeting from what looked like a job site last week. Talk about commitment. And we also see you keeping your team strong and recruiting new team members. Shout out to the BYU team for getting 5 new team members this year, and they engage them weekly with Zoom meetings. And also shout out to Professor Joseph Parker at Harding University. He started up their bridge team for the first time this year. We see you challenging yourselves and finding ways to enjoy the things that make Ssbc so special to all of us. And I just want you to know that we really hope you are currently and will continue to take the time to celebrate you and your teammates' victories, even the small ones. So here's an overview of what we're going to cover today. First, we'll start by walking you through the decisions we made this week regarding Ssbc regional events. We'll discuss the status of each event, and then we'll move on to Ssbc in person and compete from campus updates. We'll then talk about important dates that you should keep on your radar, including upcoming webinars. And finally, the remaining time will be left for Q&A at the end of this presentation. Again, my name's Sadie Brown, and I'll be your presenter today. As AISC Special Event Planner, I'm responsible for planning and facilitating the 18 regional events with our host schools and teams. But making Ssbc happen is a team effort, and our entire team here is on the call today. Christy Sattler is AISC's Senior Engineer for University Relations at AISC. She oversees Ssbc and is also responsible for the development of technical resources and programs for university-level steel students and teachers. Sean Farron is AISC's Education Assistant, and he supports our continuing education initiatives and university program initiatives. He manages all Ssbc participant and faculty inquiries, student club applications, fabricator partnership requests, and helps with regional event planning. Sean will be monitoring the chat feature during this webinar to make sure your questions are answered and if you have any technical difficulties. Maria Manukin is AISC's Education Program Manager, and Christina Harbour is AISC's Director of Education. If you're interested, you can find a detailed breakdown of our roles on the Contact Us page of our website. I have a few announcements before we dive into the exciting stuff, and these announcements are quite similar to our previous webinar, so I apologize for the redundancy if you joined us back in October. But first, you'll notice that your microphone and camera are off. If you have any questions during the presentation, just write them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and you can ask questions at any point throughout the presentation, and Sean will be monitoring them so we answer them at the end of the webinar. Just please know that when you chat the group, it will be seen by everyone. So if you want to ask a question anonymously, you can message Sean directly, and you'll see his name in the chat feature below. Similarly, if you're experiencing technical difficulties, you can message Sean and he will do his best to help you. We'll answer all the questions that come in through the chat at the end of this presentation. And if for some reason we can't get to all the questions before our time's up, we'll post a PDF of all Q&As to our website. The webinar is being recorded, so you'll also be able to find the recording posted to our website for future reference. And finally, I want to touch on safety. Safety, of course, is our top priority as we're living through a global pandemic right now. And we're all in this together, and this situation really requires that we take personal responsibility for the health and safety of ourselves, our family, and peers and colleagues. So it's really important that we are all adhering to university, local, state, and federal or regional guidelines, even if that means disrupting your competition plans. And just as a reminder, we ask that your team does not meet in person for the rest of 2020. Now, I'm quickly going to show you these important dates. Some of them have passed, but we'll go through each date in more detail at the end of this presentation. I just think it's important for you to have them on your mind. We are currently in the decision date number 1 realm, and then we'll be moving on to decision date number 2 on January 15th. We'll touch on the pre-registration update that's due. This is a new thing that we have not discussed with you all, so that'll be at the end of this presentation as well. Now, I also want to touch on our team stipend. So all teams that have indicated they'll be participating in the AISC Student Steel Bridge competition in person or compete from campus events have been issued a $500 team stipend check by AISC. We're working to get these mailed out to you as soon as possible, but COVID-19 restrictions have limited our access to our office, so they're a little delayed, but you can expect them to be mailed to you no later than December 18th. Just contact us if you do not receive your check by January 15th, and we will do our best to help you. The check is yours to keep no matter what happens, even if your in-person event's canceled at a later date or if you're no longer able to participate in Ssbc due to university restrictions. It is yours no matter what. And moving forward, you're now able to make non-refundable purchases towards your bridge project. In the past, we recommended that you wait until decision date number 1 to do that. However, if your team can swing it, it may be smart to hold off on all non-refundable purchases until January 15th. That's just a recommendation. If you need to do it now, you're welcome to. And as a reminder, teams participating in only the supplemental competition will not receive a team stipend. The stipend is only issued to teams fabricating a physical bridge. Okay, now we're going to talk about decision date number 1. How were the decisions made was what we'll touch on first, and then we'll go through the events that will be in person and what events have been canceled. I'm sure this is the part you all have been waiting for. So, to make our decisions in this webinar for decision date number 1, we worked with the host schools to determine event feasibility. Hosts started this process by using the decision matrix that's shown below. And if the decision matrix points were not met immediately, hosts then moved on to the next phase of determining event feasibility, which is evaluating pre-reg data. They looked at team travel confidence levels, the notes that you provided during pre-reg regarding your school's specific situations, and more to gauge the chances of if an in-person event will be successful. Additionally, since social distancing is super important for an event to take place right now, hosts use their pre-reg numbers to come up with possible event schedules and venue floor plans with social distancing in effect. Finally, and most importantly, they checked in with their team to just determine if they had the bandwidth to continue planning amidst all this uncertainty. You'll learn more about what an in-person event is expected to look like later on in this presentation, but I think it's just important to keep it in mind while we're going through that, how much these host schools had to consider and work to see if that was even possible and if they had the bandwidth amidst managing virtual classes and all of that to continue with planning. The host schools, students and faculty worked really hard, and I hope that you all will reach out to your regional event hosts, whether your event was canceled or not, and just send them a big thank you for their efforts thus far. Now, here is decision date number 1. We have the following events that will move forward as Ssbc compete from campus, which means that the in-person events are canceled. Carolinas, Heartland, which is formerly Mid-Continent, Metropolitan, Mid-Pacific, New England, North Central, Ohio Valley, Pacific Southwest, Rocky Mountain, Southeast, Texas, and Upstate New York. And then the events that are currently moving forward as an in-person as of November 15th is Deep South, Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, Pacific Northwest, and possibly Virginia's. So this specifically says as of November 15th because things are changing every day, and they made the decision to continue planning as of right now, but things could change, and we will, if anything develops before decision date number 2, we will let you know. If not, we will announce further developments for these in-person events on decision date number 2. Here's a little more details about the in-person events that are moving forward. If you haven't seen the dates already, here they are, and you can go to their websites to get further information as it's developed. Now, let's think about if your Ssbc regional event is moving forward as an in-person event. What happens next? I'm sure you're curious. So if your event's moving forward as in-person, your team can do the following things. You can work on your project further by ordering materials and planning for fabrication. Remember, you're going to hear me repeat this a lot, but the gathering is still discouraged by AISC in 2020, especially if it's against your school or local guidelines. If you have any questions regarding your event right now, contact your host school directly. And we also recommend that you research your university's COVID-19 restrictions for clubs and travel. Things are changing every day, but it's important to know if your school has released guidelines for travel, for club gatherings in the spring, or if they have a timeline for decision-making that you can reference. This will help you manage your team's expectations, and just be sure to check back on these guidelines every few weeks or so because things are changing and you're going to want to be in the know as soon as that happens, especially in a university setting. Additionally, you can develop your preliminary travel budget and plans. It's possible that your university may require an official proposal in order to travel or other things like that. So start planning out as much as you can now to help yourself in the future. And finally, your faculty advisor will need to complete our pre-registration update form by January 8th, and I'll discuss this form later on. So your event's moving forward with an in-person, and now you have a clear idea of what's expected of you until decision date number 2, but I'm sure you're also wondering what an in-person event will possibly look like. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through what an in-person event might look like. Please keep in mind that we are continuously evaluating this guidance and we'll update it as necessary, so it might change by the time we meet again for decision date number 2. So an in-person Ssbc regional event for the 2021 competition is actually going to consist of only one event, the main competition. All other events that have traditionally been held in person will be moved to a virtual format to minimize team-to-team contact. This includes the captain's meeting, participant forum, judges training, and awards presentation. And just keep in mind, this is kind of our bare minimum for an in-person event to happen. If things start looking up, host schools can choose to try and change up this guidance and maybe have some of these in person, but this is what we are recommending right now and what you should set your expectations for moving forward. The main competition can be a 1 or 2 day event at the discretion of the host school, and it'll likely depend on the number of participating teams, available facilities, and how many teams they can fit in a venue at a time with social distancing guidelines. A sample schedule is shown below for the in-person event spanning over 2 days, and host schools will use this as a sample schedule as a starting point, but this is not how every event will look like. They'll just use this as a reference. As you can see, day 1, everything will be virtual, and that will help teams if they have to travel the day before. And then we will have the main competition on day 2 with lunch in between. This is also at the discretion of the host school and how they want to structure lunch. We could have teams on their own for lunch where they go out and get stuff, or boxed lunches provided with a space for teams to eat socially distant, maybe separate classrooms for each team. It's all up in the air, but this is kind of what you can expect. And then we'll have a virtual award ceremony that everyone can join in. Now, in order to keep the in-person events safe and socially distant, we made a few changes to the made competition format. The first change is to aesthetics. So under normal circumstances, aesthetics judging will usually take place before the main competition or after as its own event, where all the bridges are erected and on display at the same time and in the same location. However, to minimize team-to-team contact, aesthetics judging will now be held as a part of the main competition. The head judge has the authority to determine when and where aesthetics will take place during the main competition, but AISC recommends that it be judged for aesthetics after construction and then before load testing. We just think that has the cleanest flow. The second big change to the main competition is that we're recommending staggered competition times. So we highly recommend that one team is in a venue at a time, but if a host has enough space and they want to, they can have 2 teams in a venue at a time. But having only one team compete at a time significantly reduces the host's venue size needs and volunteer needs compared to previous years. It'll make it easier for them to modify the event space, for them to enforce physical distancing rules. And you can see that this table shows sample team schedules for competition formats with 1 team and 2 teams in a time in the venue simultaneously. If we circle back to earlier in this presentation where I mentioned how hosts have to determine event feasibility, we asked hosts that careful consideration should be given to the flow of their competition space. So when I was saying that it's good to have the perspective of what the hosts had to kind of plan the past few months, they had to ask themselves, how will we maintain physical distance between both build teams as they check in or as they enter the building or move from station to station? How will we clean and disinfect each station before teams use them? Will there be enough judges to run 2 competing teams at once? How many additional volunteers and judges are needed? How much more setup time will be required? And I just wanted to go through this with you so you know that we are considering your safety very heavily and making sure that hosts are doing so as well. Some other things you can expect, which I touched on some of these already, but we're going to limit attendance to judges and build team members only. At a bare minimum, and we'll learn a little more about what bare minimum in terms of build team members only mean later on. But we're not going to have spectators, visitors, or sponsors. Staggered registration check-in times, maybe with a check-in phone call, and everyone in the venue will wear masks at all times, even when social distancing isn't possible. If a host school campus and their administration require other social distancing to be put in place, they will have to do that as well, and we may issue different guidance as we get closer. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about what happens if your in-person event was canceled. So if your in-person event is canceled and you pre-registered for both Ssbc in-person and Compete from Campus, we'll automatically move your pre-registration to Ssbc Compete from Campus only. So you don't need to worry about it. However, if your pre-registration was for Ssbc in-person, but not Compete from Campus, we will not be transferring you to Compete from Campus automatically. You'll have to contact us. We evaluated our pre-reg data after the deadline, and there were a significant number of teams that did not initially pre-register for both in-person and Compete from Campus. We contacted every team, and most of them did it by mistake, so we fixed that. However, there are about 20 teams in the country that decided not to participate and compete from campus due to lack of resources or campus space. So that's why we're not going to automatically move you, because some schools did have a reason for not selecting compete from campus. You can see in this table right here, this is what I mean by it. So if you did not select compete from campus, you have the X mark next to your team, and if your event's canceled, you will pretty much just not be participating in SSBC this year. But if you selected both SSBC in-person and compete from campus, you are in the clear, and we will move forward with compete from campus for you. If you're not sure if that last slide applies to you, head over to our website and go to aisc.org/SSBC and go to the team resources page. And in the additional resources section, you'll see a list that you can download with all the schools that haven't gotten back to us. And we will not be moving to compete from campus unless we hear from them. So you can check out that list and make sure you're not on there. And if you are, just send us a message and we'll get you fixed. All right, another important change you should be aware of is that when your in-person event is canceled, the SSBC Compete from Campus is now planned and managed by AISC, not the host school. Therefore, moving forward, you should not be contacting your host school for any logistics. Your main point of contact for all competition questions will be Sean Farron, our education assistant, and his email address is right on this slide. You can reach out to us for any questions that you have, but as I mentioned, hosts don't have a role in planning Compete from Campus, so it's all on AISC. So let's continue on this path and say that your in-person event is canceled, and you also know that you're participating in Compete from Campus. And we'll talk more about Compete from Campus, specifically what you need to do between now and January 15th, how the regions will be structured, and what materials are needed. We won't be going into detail on the Compete from Campus option today because all of that will be covered on our next webinar in December. If you're participating in Compete from Campus, you should also be working on your project further by ordering materials and planning for fabrication. I know I sound like a broken record, but especially with the rising cases in the country right now, it's very important that you do not gather in 2020. Our Compete from Campus guidelines will be available in early December. So as soon as they are available, I recommend that you look through them with your team and gather all the questions that you have. And then you can ask those questions on our Compete from Campus webinar on December 9th. You should also research your university's COVID-19 restrictions for clubs and on-campus gatherings. Look into venues that you can use to compete from campus, and start talking with your administration to see what restrictions might be in place. And finally, your faculty advisor will also need to complete our pre-registration update form by January 8th. Now, let's move on to talking about region structure for Compete from Campus, because I think this is a confusing topic for a lot of people, and hopefully this chart will clear things up for you. So if an in-person regional event is canceled, all teams in that region, including teams that previously planned to compete from campus within that region, will be competing against each other. So you can see in this list, 1 through 12, all of those events in-person events have been canceled. And so all teams that are pre-registered for those regions will compete against each other within that region. However, if an in-person regional event is not canceled, but there are still teams within those regions that wish to compete from campus, all of those teams will be placed in a separate region that will compete only against other teams that are also participating from their respective campuses, even though they're in-person events moving forward. So you can see region number 13 as of right now for Compete from Campus is the Compete from Campus region. We're going to come up with a more creative name for that, but that's what we got for right now. But all of the regions listed in green, Deep South, Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, Pacific Northwest, and Virginia's If there are teams that are only participating from Compete from Campus within those regions, they will all be in one region together called the Compete from Campus region. If at any point these regions in green, the in-person events are canceled, they will be structured just like regions 1 through 12 and competing against each other only. I hope that helped a bit. I know it can be a little confusing. So you will learn more about the materials needed for Compete from Campus in our December webinar, but as a reminder, here's what you'll need to provide in order to compete from your local campus. So when you're looking at venues and talking with your administration, you can show them these specs. So you need level floor space, material for decking and 2,500 pounds of load, a mechanism to prevent load from falling upon collapse and failure of the bridge. Buckets work really well for that. At least one judge familiar with the competition. They should be affiliated with they can be affiliated with your school, but they should not be on your team. And we will be hosting a training webinar for all Compete from Campus judges in 2021. And we'll provide guidance, we'll provide dates and more specifics on that at a later date. You've seen this webinar date a couple of times now, the Compete from Campus webinar on December 9th. But if you're looking to learn a little more about Compete from Campus before then, I suggest that you go to aisc.org/SSBC webinars, and you can watch our archived webinar, which is the overview of the 2021 Student Steel Bridge competition. We got a lot of really great questions, clarifying things about Compete from Campus on that webinar, and it would be pretty helpful for you. So it's there if you need it. And we're not going to touch much on the supplemental competition during this presentation either, but here are some key things you should keep in mind. The document you see on the left is the supplemental competition rules, and you can find the rules and clarifications for the supplemental competition on our website. They're located just below the Ssbc rules. If you just scroll down, you'll see a whole separate section for rules and clarifications. And the deadline for submission is March 1st. If you missed it as well, there's another webinar that I highly recommend viewing, which is the Winning Writing Strategies for Students, Ssbc Supplemental Competition and Beyond. Even if you're not participating in the supplemental competition, this webinar will equip you with tools and strategies that you can use and take with you while you're working on the supplemental or in your professional career. You'll learn from 3 practicing structural engineers who have decades of experience putting together engineering reports. So check it out if you haven't already. Now, let's circle back to the important dates slide that I showed you at the start of this presentation, and we'll talk more about each date in detail. I'm going to show this to you again. But if this doesn't give you everything you need, you can head over to aisc.org/SSBC important dates, and we made a document that you can print out to have everything all on one page of the important dates and webinars coming up. You can also, there's buttons to add each event to your calendar, and we'll update this document as more dates come up. Just wanted to show this to you. I highly, highly recommend that you have this bookmarked or in your toolkit for when you need to remind yourself on what's coming up. The next 2 webinars that AISC is hosting is the Compete from Campus webinar and then decision date number 2. The decision date number 2 will be on Thursday, January 21st. And on January 8th, we have the pre-registration update form due. So this update form, the way it's structured is we realize that in order to make decisions for decision date number 2, we need updated information from you. So that includes maybe if your spring travel confidence changed, you have more notes that you can provide us on your spring travel. We're also going to ask you the minimum number of teams that you can attend your event. So maybe that's just your build team members. And then we're going to ask you for your desired number of team members to attend. So we know that it's not just the build team members that work on your event all year. There are other team members involved, and if we can get them to come, we will try our best to. Our host schools that are moving forward with an in-person event are going to be coming up with official proposals for their administration, and we're going to include a kind of like backup plan proposal. So one with our ideal with the desired number of teams. But then if that's too uncomfortable for them, we're going to try giving them another proposal with the minimum number of teams. So this will really help us make and determine if events can happen. And so there will be a quick turnaround with this pre-registration update form. So it's going to open in mid-December, and we're going to need you to fill it out by January 8th. We're not opening it now because we think a lot's going to change in the next few weeks, and we want to have the most current data as possible. We will send an email to everyone when this form is available at aisc.org/pre-reg, Ssbc pre-reg update. On decision date number 2, January 15th, like I said, we're going to be reevaluating all of these events again using the decision matrix. Hopefully by January, many universities will have communicated to you their plans for the spring semester, and we'll have a clear idea if in-person events are feasible. We'll be looking at if the in-person regional events will be canceled. All of them will be canceled, hopefully not, but with teams competing from their individual campuses, or if only the supplemental competition will take place, canceling Ssbc entirely. We are remaining hopeful, and we'll announce our decision on January 15th. Like I said, if your team can swing it, it may be smart to hold off on all non-refundable purchases until this date. And again, the supplemental competition submission deadline is March 1st. You will submit your materials to aisc.org/Ssbc submission, and this link is included in the supplemental rules. And then the Compete from Campus submission deadline. We have not decided on an official deadline for this yet, but it will be sometime in late March. We will have this date set for you by the time of our Compete from Campus webinar in early December. And you'll use the same aisc.org/Ssbc submission link to submit your Compete from Campus submissions. And now on this slide, you will see a list of resources that we have created for Ssbc teams. All of these resources can be found at aisc.org/Ssbc, or check out our October webinar because we walk through each resource in detail, and they're laid out for you right there in the recording. For example, so since AISC is requesting that all teams work together virtually right now, we created a working remotely as a team guide to ease the transition to working virtual. So even if you are already familiar with virtual classes and stuff, we hope the tools in this guide will help you develop strategic teamwork skills and help you out in the future. Another resource that I want to highlight is our NCSEA partnership. So we've partnered with the National Council of Structural Engineers Associations to pair practicing engineers with student teams to provide mentorship and guidance as you develop your analysis reports for the supplemental competition or other parts of your Ssbc projects. So check out aisc.org/Ssbc under the team resources, and you'll find all of these there. All right, now I know we said this was going to be a pretty quick webinar, so we are ready for your questions. You can chat your questions in the chat feature. You're also welcome to ask them anonymously. You can direct message them to Sean, and he will go through everything. We're just going to take a minute or so to weed through these questions that are coming in, and we'll gather the rest as they come.
Thanks for submitting questions, everybody, so far. We have quite a few already. Do you want me to go ahead and start, Sadie, or do we want to take a minute to sort?
Yeah, of course. You can go for it, Sean.
Yeah, okay. The first question is, where can we find specific information regarding our regional event competition schedule and structure?
That's a good question. So we don't expect the exact schedules to be available until likely January, maybe earlier, but I would set your expectations for January. So decision date number 2, that also coincides with when we're telling hosts. So if hosts, when they should be locking down non-refundable, maybe like venue deposits and things like that. So they may need to wait until January 15th or maybe even a little later to solidify the schedule. But as soon as they are available, your host school will email you, and it'll also be available on your competition website. So if you go to aisc.org/SSBC, we have a regional events page, and every URL for each regional event is listed there, where you can see the specific website for that. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks. Okay. So this next question is a little longer. Right now, we are planning to do the in-person event. What happens if our university has an out-of-state travel restriction in the spring and we are no longer able to travel? How can we compete if the rest of our region is still competing in person?
Yeah, good question. So you can participate and compete from campus even if your in-person event is still moving forward. So if you pre-registered for in-person and compete from campus, just send us an email and let us know, hey, we can no longer do the in-person, we can only do compete from campus, and we'll update your pre-registration. And then what that means is when you compete, you'll be grouped with other teams that are also competing from campus while their regional events in person. So all that, I can jump over to the slide to show you what that breakdown is. Let's see. Just as a refresher. So you would be within that number 13 compete from campus region. I hope that answered your question. I'm going to jump back over to the question side. Sean, you can go to the next one.
All right, great. My regional event was canceled, but I still want to compete in person. Can I switch regions now?
Good question. Unfortunately, no. We allowed region switches prior to the pre-registration deadline, but there are a lot of logistics that hosts need to coordinate, especially with making proposals to their administrations, coordinating exact schedules and social distancing. So if they made their decision to move forward, that was strictly because they evaluated their pre-registration numbers and determined it was feasible. So we can't allow any teams to switch to an in-person event if their event was canceled. We do still encourage you to participate in compete from campus with your original region.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so for all the schools that are compete from campus, like registered for compete in campus, will we all be competing on the same day in real time? What day will this be, if so?
Good question. So no, you won't be competing at the same time in the same day. You can do your competition on a date and time that works for you. As part of the compete from campus, you'll be asked to submit a video and a copy of your score sheet. And you'll just have to submit everything by the end of the March deadline. That exact deadline will be announced in early December. As I mentioned, we haven't come up with it exactly yet, but we recognize that it is not reasonable to expect everyone to compete on the same day, especially if you need to find a judge to be present on your campus and work out your campus logistics. So you can do it any time of when the guidelines are released and end of March.
Okay. Can compete from campus judges be alumni from the team?
Yes, they can. They just can't be members of your team. We are trusting that you use your discretion to make sure that this person is not going to be super biased, not going to be biased at all, and will just judge you fairly. And a lot of times, your alumni have a lot of knowledge of the bridge projects and will be able to be a fantastic judge. So they just can't be members of your team.
When will we know more about the status of national finals? If it gets canceled, does that mean the entire competition would also be canceled, or is there a chance to compete at a national level from campus?
Great question. So the host is working out some logistics with their university still, and you can expect an update about national finals on decision date number 2 during the webinar in January. If the event does get canceled, we'll take a look at what the alternative options are. We don't have them fully set just yet, but we don't believe that the entire competition itself would be canceled, no.
Okay. My team was not aware of the pre-registration deadline. Is it still possible to register my team for the in-person competition?
If you want to register your team for an in-person competition, unfortunately, that is not possible. As I mentioned previously, the deadline was set to help our host determine whether or not they could host based on the pre-reg data. And so we did try to reach out to all faculty advisors that we didn't hear from. We reached out before and after the deadline. So if you have further concerns, though, reach out to us directly and we'd be happy to help you as best as we can. You can reach out to Sean or myself. You see our contact info right here. But sorry, we wouldn't be able to have you pre-register for an in-person right now.
Will a list be compiled with all the required materials to compete from campus? Our team is afraid we don't have everything required and we want to be prepared.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the guidelines will be super detailed for you. We'll have a checklist of items that you need to prepare, along with a list of materials that you will need to provide. So you'll have a clear expectation of what's expected of you and what you need to prepare for. And it'll be coming in a few weeks. So hopefully you will have enough time to get everything together.
Will you help us source a local judge to come to our Compete from Campus competition on the day we select?
Oh, yeah. I love that this question was asked. We have a huge network of members that under normal years usually jump at the bit to help students in any way that they can. And I'm sure that we would be able to find someone that would be willing to under COVID restrictions as well. So just reach out to our planning team, any of us here, and we can do our digging and research to try and find you someone in your area.
How will the dice roll work if competing from campus? Will we all get the same number?
That is a very good question. The final logistics are still being worked out for that. So I can't give you a definitive answer, but I recommend checking out the Compete from Campus guidelines in December and the December webinar, and we'll have it figured out by then.
Okay.
These are great questions.
Yeah.
Keep them coming, everyone.
I'm having a lot of questions come in all of a sudden, so it's taking me a second to get sorted.
Okay.
No problem. Can a Compete from Campus team, a team competing from campus, qualify for nationals? If so, how many will be able to qualify?
Yeah, we will allow Compete from Campus teams to qualify for nationals, including in-person nationals if it happens. But the qualifying number will be based on the final number of participants. So we'll use the similar matrix that we use for in-person qualifications, but obviously the Compete from Campus region number, as I was mentioning, number 13, to jog your memory, might have a little more than that, but you will be able to qualify for nationals, and that info will be in the guidelines.
Great, awesome. For supplemental competition only teams and all competitions in general, will there be any online social events or fairs for meeting other teams? Just asking, since the social aspect of seeing and talking to other teams is a big part of the regular competitions.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are still working out exactly how we want virtual social events to happen. But we have a few ideas that we're brainstorming, whether they're going to be smaller events specific to a region, or we're also exploring the idea of having something at NASCC, the Steel Conference, with maybe some sessions and stuff in there. So we do understand that the social aspect is huge and sometimes the most exciting part of the regional events sometimes. So we have that on our priority list and our vision moving forward. We just haven't worked out the exact details. If you have ideas, send them our way. We welcome any suggestions you can provide to help us make it as successful as possible.
Is there a compete from campus nationals that's separate from the in-person nationals?
That is a good question. I believe so, but let me defer to Christy because she might have a more definitive answer on that.
Yeah, so the compete from campus teams will still qualify for the in-person national finals, if that makes sense. So we'll have more information about that in December at the webinar, and you can check out the guidelines, but the intent is that you would still qualify for that in-person event.
All right.
Yeah, we still got more questions.
Okay.
Can our faculty advisors be judges, or are they considered part of our team?
Yeah, so this is still being discussed by our rules committee. So I would stay tuned for the compete from campus guidelines on whether or not that will be allowed. It's still being debated right now.
How will the aesthetics judging be done for compete from campus events?
This is also still being discussed by our rules committee. So we will let you know about that in the guidelines. Like I said, things are kind of changing often, and our rules committee is working hard to make sure that they have the robust answers to everything as much as they can. And we have not been made aware of that decision just yet. So we stay tuned to know how aesthetics will be judged.
Okay. What happens in the event that a team is no longer able to compete in the in-person competition after the compete from campus deadline of March 1st?
That is a really good question that we realized was a potential special case that could come up. So we are evaluating what will happen, and we'll let you know as soon as we know. We're working through it, and hopefully we'll have it for you by the December.
Actually, Sadie, just a reminder, the compete from campus deadline is actually the end of March. So if something happens before the beginning of March, there's still that option to compete. Now, the special case would be for those in-person events that are happening in April. That's the sticky situation. But if your in-person event gets canceled before the end of March, you still have that opportunity to compete in the compete from campus.
Yes. Sorry, I did not catch that deadline right there. Thank you, Christy.
Okay, still a lot of questions coming in. If you chatted me your question earlier and I may have missed it, I think I got everybody, but yeah, if there's like a question you really need to answer and it seems like I may have missed it. If you asked it just in the last couple of minutes, we're still working on getting to it, but I just thought I'd say that. Okay, who will be responsible to find the compete from campus judge?
It is the responsibility of that team to find their compete from campus judge. So when you're signing up to participate in compete from campus, you are also signing up for the responsibility of finding a judge. So you just have to kind of vet, find someone, and we will have the training webinar that will teach that judge on what to do. The webinar will also, it'll take place pretty early as well, so you can, and it will be recorded. So if you really can't decide on who can be a judge, or maybe that person is undecided, they can also wait until the judge's training took place. They could watch the training and determine whether or not it is something that they are interested in. So this is the responsibility of your team to find your compete from campus judge.
Okay, will the main competition live stream be open to the public to view?
So the main competition live stream is optional for an in-person event. We hope that it will be possible for all hosts to do the live stream, and if it is possible, then yes, it will be open for the public watch, specifically because I know there's a lot of parents that love to attend the competitions and everything, especially sponsors, to be able to watch. So if it is taking place, we will make it public. But just keep in mind that that is optional right now. For example, there may be a event that's taking place outside in a parking lot, and we can't get a strong enough Wi-Fi signal to do a live stream. So if it happens, yes, it will be public.
Okay. I'm still waiting to hear from my university about clubs and meeting in person for next semester. We're currently registered for Compete from Campus. What would be the course of action if we are not allowed to meet?
You should be following your campus guidelines. So if you realize that you are not allowed to meet, your university announces that later on, then you can still compete in the supplemental competition. So if it's looking likely right now that you might not be able to compete from campus, make sure you are pre-registered for the supplemental. If you're not, just reach out to us and we'll add it to your pre-registration, and just make sure you submit everything by the March 1st deadline for supplemental.
Will the supplemental competition reports be made public as well?
That is a good question. So the videos will be made available for public review as a part of the national finals judging. So if a team makes it to national finals, the exciting part is that the supplemental national finals will be judged publicly. So yes, the videos will be, but there's no plans for reports right now.
Okay. All right. When a regional event was canceled by the host school, was there an attempt to find another school to host?
That's a good question. So a lot of these are really good questions. I know I keep saying that, but under normal years, if a regional event host was unable to host, we would do everything in our power to find another host, or AISC would jump in and host. And this year we made the tough decision at the start of this pandemic that we would not attempt to find a new regional event host if it was canceled, just because it is a lot to ask on a new school coming in August, September, October, to expect them to jump in, learn about the competition, and get plannings under these circumstances. So no, this year we decided that we would not attempt to find another host school, which I know is tough. But what we did, if a school we did say that if a school reached out to us offering to host, that we would do it, but that was before the pre-registration deadline. So I think that is it for questions. Am I right, Sean? That's all we got?
Yeah. I'm just combing through again to make sure I didn't miss any. But yeah, that looks like all the questions we wanted to answer. If we want to.
Okay, so I'm going to jump to our next slide. Thank you, everyone, for these fantastic questions. If you can, Sean, we're going to right now paste the post-event survey into the chat box, and we would sincerely appreciate it if you could fill it out. Let us know how we did on this webinar. And make sure to attend the Compete from Campus webinar on December 9th. And don't forget to download that important dates document at aisc.org/SSBC important dates. Thank you all so much. Please fill out that event survey, and we hope to see you all soon. Reach out to us if you need anything.